Jak X Combat Racing, Naughty Dog's final installment in the Jak and Daxter franchise, and in traditional Naughty Dog fashion up to this point, it turned out to be a kart racer. But just considering how different this universe is to the Crash Bandicoot universe, it's a hell of a lot grittier. Your enjoyment of the game is completely reliant on the energy and momentum that it carries, and believe it or not, it's combat. Jak X released in 2006, and after a more recent playthrough, it definitely feels its age, but it holds up pretty well to be honest, and if you've never played through the game, I would definitely give it a shot. It's pretty damn unique and it makes for some pretty hype moments. But before I delve more into the gameplay itself, let's just boot up a new save file and start up the story. So, game starts and Daxter's doing his usual routine of telling stories, but this time in the alternate setting of Crash City, which is riddled with crime syndicates and is generally painted to be a really shit place to live. I mean, just imagine you get off from your 9 to 5 and you watch fucking Jak nuke another car in front of you on your way home. Anyways, both Jak and Daxter immediately face some animosity from the locals, and as Jak makes the intelligent observation here, this opening cutscene is fucking awesome. It sets the tone throughout the entire game and even features some music from Queens of the Stone Age. Following the main story here, we find out exactly why we were called to Crash City. Crew's daughter, Rain, followed her father's will and brought his closest associates to drink to his passing. But unless you're a bit of a fucking troglodyte, you know he's a bit of a sleazebag, and it turns out he poisons the entire cast of characters, including his own daughter. Ashlyn, in a fairly reasonable response, pulls a fucking gun on Rain and holds her at gunpoint while Jak vouches for her innocence despite not knowing her whatsoever. Crew pops back up and explains that he has poisoned you for one of the least logical reasons I have ever heard, being that he wanted to win a big race before he died, but he didn't, so now you have to do it for him posthumously. And without even using a sliver of reason, everyone just kind of agrees to the competition to get the antidote, and we're straight into the action. Before your first race, we're introduced to yet another important character to the game's story, GT Blitz, who's the news anchor covering our competitions. He serves as the resident shit talker for most of the game's duration, but he's actually one of my favorite characters you're gonna find in the game and has a few witty lines and moments.
Hey, that's foul! I've been covering this sport for decades. Do you honestly think you can come on my show and make me look like a fool of you?
Easy, boys. My story's almost over. Wait a minute, it gets better! Really? Jak! Are you crazy? You ruined my story! Listen, Rain, baby. We've been chased, attacked, shot at, poisoned, and blown up! How could it get any worse? It's worse. Ding ding, third floor. Body chains, drugs, food, torture devices. Hey, buddy, you seen any heroes around here? Wow! What'd they do to...
After a little taunting, we finally get to race for our first time, and goddamn is it a sick system. Jak X primarily revolves around maintaining your boost to create a lead just like in CTR, but the biggest change across the two games is the way that power-ups work. Jak X introduces 4 types of colored power-ups with the same purposes as their Jak 1 counterparts. Blue Eco is used for speed and adds to your boost, Green Eco just heals you, Yellow Eco is used for offensive tools like machine guns and rockets, and Red Eco is almost exclusively used for defense. The game also included Dark Eco as an incentive to drive more skillfully and not die, so that way you can get the upgraded weapons and a fresh set of HP, which can be a complete and total game changer. And you might be asking yourself, well, how did they integrate the Light Eco since it was a staple of Jak 3? Well, they just kind of decided to pretend it didn't exist and forgot about it. To be completely fair to them, I have no idea how they would have integrated it anyway, but moving on to the driving itself here. This is sort of where I have my issues, but I can't really rip into the game too much here. To me personally, it feels ridiculously bouncy, and the turning feels a little bit clunky at certain points, which would indicate that you should drift, but sometimes angles are too sharp to drift, and the answer is to just take it slower, which kind of feels unnatural in a game like this. But take everything I said there with a complete grain of salt, because it could just be a complete skill issue on my part, so moving on. After finishing the race, we get our first interaction with GT Blitz, who asks some fairly rudimentary questions which Kira takes quite personally for some apparent reason. This is actually a super solid cutscene, clearly portraying immediately that GT has a lot of stakes in the business and that you're not really anything more than a number to him, while also showing off that he has mad drip. I would actually say the entire first act of the game is fairly solid as a whole, with creating questions and rivalries while also just making Jak look like a complete badass, as edgy as he is. The entire cast is actually done pretty well here, with Kira rightfully coming back as the main interest for Jak after whatever the hell happened in Jak 3. And both Torn and Ashlyn maintain their cold exterior, with Ashlyn in particular being a complete dickhead to Rain throughout the entire game. However, I'm gonna nitpick the hell out of this story for a minute here, because this genuinely doesn't make any sense at certain points. First and foremost, why did Jak go out to Crash City after deadass murdering Crew who betrayed him? Secondly, Crew invited his closest associates. And how exactly do Torrin and Ashlyn qualify as associates of his? And third, if Crew's men had the antidote and everyone knew about it, why would Jak be so compliant and race instead of just fighting to get it himself? This is the exact same Jak we saw defeat 2 separate world-ending threats by himself and also use some weird goo to turn into a literal fucking angel and heal bullet wounds. Was he just bored? They needed a story obviously to make the game work, and that's just what they came up with. Before we get back to the gameplay, I just gotta talk about the game's soundtrack for a minute here. Being that this game is from the mid-2000s, it took some inspiration from some of the metal sounds at the time, resulting in one of my favorite game OSTs of all time. My serious recommendation when you play this game is just go into the settings and immediately crank the music volume to the max. If you're into heavy metal at all, this is a fantastic listen, and more specifically if you like stuff more like Breaking Benjamin or maybe some of the metalcore stuff that came around at the same time, you're gonna really fuck with this stuff. This is the type of soundtrack that when the good part hits, I just go into this like lizard brain state where I just full send the worst drifts of all fucking time because it just feels right. Which more often than not just leads me to like slam into a wall and die immediately, but you know what, it felt cool. Anyway, not to ramble on for too much longer, fucking banger OST, go listen to it. Back to the story side of things, we get a little further into the plot of the game by learning of the major crime syndicate who has a massive amount of control over the races called the Mizo Gang. Mizo remains largely anonymous. The primary antagonist who recurs throughout the entire game is Razor, who is a pretty damn solid villain, and his voice actor David Herman, who also voices Arrow, believe it or not, absolutely nails the posh yet intimidating accent that Razor has throughout the entire game. Our next cutscene showcases the return of Pecker finally, which enrages Daxter, leading to one of many self-aware jokes he makes throughout the game's duration.
Who's his agent? Pecker always gets the sweet digs in these adventures.
Pecker actually moves the game's plot forward quite a bit by providing some insight on the very mysterious Mizo, and very quickly the game's story becomes focused on determining who exactly Mizo is. I forgot to explain this a little earlier, but the game is divided into 4 major cups which will serve as the game's primary chapters, each ending in a 3-part Grand Prix. The first act of the game is the Red Cup, so that's just what I'm going to call it from now on. The Red Cup features a few tracks from Spargus, Haven City, Crass City, and the Icelands, all established areas in the Jak universe. My personal favorite of these tracks being the Crass City ones, more specifically the Death Drome and the Seaport, which almost allow for constant boosting. To finish out the Red Cup story, Razor brings out the newest racer and his crew after talking some mad shit, who turns out to be UR-86, who's one of the KG robots from Jak 3, and an absolute tower of a unit. And just when things are looking bad, Sig shows up out of nowhere just to be the lovable character that he is.
Great to be back.
As I mentioned earlier, the Grand Prix consists of 3 races which will each give you a maximum of 10 points, which are all tallied up at the end to determine the winner. Pretty similar to the Gem Cups in CTR. And the hyped up character that's supposed to take you out in these typically has a stronger AI and is supposed to be your main competition across 3 said races. And this is kind of where we start getting into some of the issues I have with this game. Each one of these big events follows the exact same pattern. Jak and his crew win a few races, and oh no, someone new shows up, talks a lot of shit, and you crush them in the Grand Prix, rinse and repeat. I fully understand that the format of this game kind of forces their hand here to some extent, but the biggest crime is that they just forget about the racer immediately after you win. After we win the Red Cup, we don't see UR-86 in a single other cutscene, and the same thing applies to the other racers that we'll see in the Green and Blue Cups in a few minutes. Okay, so back to the story here again. Jak wins a big race, we get a 10 out of 10 cutscene where Pecker tries to explain his findings about Mizo, and Blitz absolutely goes apeshit. Meanwhile, Kira wants to join the racing team, but Samos won't let her. Moving on to some racing, we probably got some new areas, so let's see what we got here. We got Spargus, Crass City, Haven City, and the Icelands. Okay. Well, you know what, at least there's a few new racetracks and events in each of these, so let's just go through them real quick. There's this game mode called Deathmatch where you drive and shoot the infinitely respawning cars to earn some points, and you get a multiplier based on what lap you're on to promote some speeds, you know, just moseying along. There's a freeze race, which is kind of like the old time trials from CTR, except they're really easy this time around, but they're still pretty fun, and I like the high risk, high reward on some of the higher value time stoppers. We got artifact races, just like those missions in Jak 3 where artifacts spawn randomly, and you need to collect 10 before anyone else does. We got power cell races, which I'm actually a huge fan of, where you collect a power cell on the track, and you need to boost to fully charge it and get a point, as well as send it forward as a projectile, and any cell you get to 100% gives you a mine as well to defend yourself with. The worst of the bunch is called Rush Hour, where you just need to crash into oncoming cars. It's super boring in my opinion, and the cars can just send you into a wall if you're not careful, so it's boring, but it's somewhat painless. During the Green Cup though, the game introduces by a fucking mile the worst track in the entire game in my opinion, being the Eastern Tour, dude. I fucking hate this map. It sucks. They combine every single part of the worst maps into one, dude. I fucking hate it. And also the game scared the fucking shit out of me by teleporting Sig right in front of me last second. In other news, Cleaver's back as the main rival for this chapter, and he's the exact same character from Jak 3, except he unfortunately does not bring along Vigor, which is kind of a crime in and of itself. The crew gets back to Haven City proper, and we begin to start asking the super obvious question of why exactly crew wants to really win the trophy, which Rain goes to investigate, and Ashlyn is once again passive-aggressive. We go through the Grand Prix for this cup, and just like that, Cleaver is never in another cutscene again in this game. Next up we got the Blue Cup, which is one of my favorite parts of the entire game, but it's also where the game story really starts to get interesting. For starters, we found out that Crew made a bet with Mizo that if we win the championship, Crew gets control over Mizo's territory or vice versa. And as far as our racing areas, we got Spargus, Crass City, Haven City, and the Ice. Okay, I've been sort of hinting at it in the way for a bit now, but this is one of the biggest complaints I have with the game. The tracks are seriously fucking lazy at certain points. In terms of original circuit races, there are only 13 tracks across the game, so what do they do to increase the length of it? They make what they call medley tracks, where they sort of fuse the two together. I know it's a bit confusing, so I've made a chart for us to look at here. So let me break this down for you. Up on the top we have all the Spargus tracks, in the center we have the Haven City and Crass City tracks, and then at the bottom we have the Ice tracks. All the way on the left we have the original circuit tracks that are unaltered. Towards the center we have the medley tracks, which are the hybrids of the two original tracks, and then we have the tours, which are usually a combination of 3 or so tracks. All of this makes a lot more sense when you're actually playing through the game, but the point I'm trying to make here is that this shit gets repetitive ridiculously quickly just due to the amount of times you see the same shit throughout your playthroughs. Not to mention the map layout doesn't even give you a proper indication of where you're going because they just decided a straight line was what they should use, which is just, come on, that's just fucking lazy. And because of this, you no longer know what shortcuts are unlocked or blocked off, and you're only going to know that when you turn the fucking corner. Now I know I might be painting myself here as a Jak X hater or something, but I can assure you I'm not. I fucking love this game. I think it's fantastic, but just because it gives me a bit of a nostalgia boner, doesn't mean I'm going to just overlook what isn't really amazing about this game. Another quick complaint about this game is that stages no longer have dedicated music. It just throws on a random track from the pool it has, which in terms of gameplay isn't important at all, but the sort of stuff kinda helps tracks stand out and be more memorable, something that CTR in my opinion excelled at. This is a change that I don't really understand, and it just kinda feels like a step back to me. But back to the good here. Razor is becoming the main rival for the Blue Cup and comes out of retirement not just to beat Jak, but outright states it's just to fucking kill him, due to him winning too much and pissing off Mizo. Pecker also shows up to showcase that Mizo is betting big time against Jak and is bringing out all the big guns to take them out. So overall the stakes here are at an all-time high. And get this, we get a new game mode, and I think this is probably my favorite alternate game mode in Jak X, which is the Capture the Flag style game mode, which works super well with this type of game, and I got some pretty damn cool saves in it. Overall good shit. I can't believe I've taken this long to talk about the game's vehicle system. The game essentially breaks all your vehicles down into different classes, 1, 2, and 3, which essentially makes sure you use a variety of vehicles across your playthrough. You can upgrade said vehicles in the garage using orbs you earned in each race, allowing a lot of user creativity. Speaking of creativity, you can actually earn a lot of different cosmetics and accessories through the game itself and build a custom vehicle with your own paint jobs too. Considering that this is a PS2 game, this is really damn solid customization overall. Okay, let's just finish up the Blue Cup here. Mizo finally appeared, of course just being a silhouette, but you know what, he's still here. He has an offer for the entire cast of characters that if they just walk away now, he'll spare their lives, which obviously we can't accept, which just makes GT absolutely shocked, and then it's time for Jak and Razor to face off in the pre. But get this shit, once you win the pre, Razor doesn't have a single scene throughout the rest of the game. Dude, come on, how does this keep happening? Razor is such a cool character, you can't just cut him, it's not like he's dead, he's still racing, he's just irrelevant now? I don't know. But speaking of relevance, GT Blitz is now center show, and we also find out that his father was also a racer who died on the track, which really doesn't seem to bother him. And after Jack's car gets sabotaged, we find out that it was the same explosives used to kill Blitz's father, which once again elicits such an odd response. GT also reveals to Rain that Jack killed her father, which naturally is a bit of a bombshell for anyone, but she becomes pretty set on winning it herself. And now it's time for the Grand Championship. I'm sorry that I'm skipping over basically the entire final chapter of the game, but realistically you're not missing anything whatsoever. This is easily the most repetitive and boring part of the game, being that we've seen every single map and game mode featured in this chapter, plus it features the biggest dry spell in terms of story cutscene. This is one of the few situations of a game that I just really could not wait until it was over. This final chapter just drags on way too long without any plot movement, and it just gets really annoying. But we'll talk about that more later. Let's just finish the game out. Kira does what she could have done from the very start of the game and basically tells Samos to fuck off and joins the race anyway. And then boom, GT Blitz announces that Mizo has a surprise driver for the big race. And then we cut into karts and GT is also there too. Yeah, no real explanation, he's just kinda here for the next 10 minutes. However, we do get some explanation for this after the race. He storms over and seals the antidote himself, and big shocker, GT Blitz is Mizo. The execution of this is fucking terrible. It's just GT saying that there's a new driver, and then boom, his ass is just sitting there. But let's finish this out. We chase down Mizo and shoot at him for like 5 solid minutes before he crashes, and then the antidote is unharmed, but Mizo himself is completely incapacitated. Mizo warns us about Rain, and then we just leave his ass to die. Rain seems to have immediately forgotten that we killed her dad, and she still walks up and gives Jack a hug, and leaves. Before she leaves the rest of Crew's diary for us to listen to, revealing that she was in on the entire thing the whole time, and that we essentially created a crime boss that now owns Haven and Crash City, and no one really seems to care that much. Jack finally kisses Kira, roll credits. There's not really a whole lot of replay value for this game, so that's just kinda where I'm gonna call it as far as covering the game. It's pretty interesting, and where it does take a small step down in gameplay in my opinion, it does a way better job with the story, and the overall presentation of this game is way ahead of its time. And I said it earlier, but I will say it again. If you have never played through this game, do yourself a favor and try it out. It's a good ass time. I never really got a chance to play this online or even with friends, but I have to imagine it's a lot of fun. Overall, I think I'm going to give this game like a 7.5 out of 10, which is pretty damn good for a game that came out in 06. The main issues I have with it really just being the repetition that really starts to build up the closer you get to the end. And I think that's going to do it for me. I'm sure you guys can tell I'm still not 100% from this like ongoing illness, so if you hear like a major difference between some of the audio takes, it's really just like my subtle recovery, so it kind of just worked out that way. Anyways guys, if you enjoyed the content, I would really appreciate a like and a sub. It means a lot to me. If you have any games you'd love to see me cover, I really need those suggestions down in the comments. And with that, I'm checking out. See you on the next one.